people died after Singh's followers ran amok in the city of Panchkula on Friday. It forced a strong response from police, who moved in with water cannon and tear gas in an effort to stop the violence from spreading.
Finally, news of the death of French actress Michele, who performed with some of France's leading directors and had a long relationship with actor Alain Delon. Michele, who starred in such classics as Weekend by Jean-Luc Godard or Yves Robert's The Tall Blonde Man with One Black Shoe, one of the great sex symbols of the 60s and 70s. She directed documentaries later in her life. Michele was 79. We have more news coming up. Time now for the France 24 debate. Here in France, it's back to school. Not for kids, don't worry, not yet, but for politicians. New President Emmanuel Macron convening a Monday morning government seminar. This in a context of plummeting poll numbers and ahead of what's already, you could say, a make-or-break test for his young tenure, the unveiling of a new labor reform bill. Last Thursday, on a trip to Romania, he quipped that the French hate reform and that it's up to its leaders to explain why it's needed. Can he convince citizens when already left-wing trade unions are digging in for a fight? They're vowing to bring the country to a standstill with strikes that kick off on September the 12th. They're particularly worried about caps on severance pay. There's the content, but also the manner of the reforms, relying heavily on what the French call ordinances, essentially decrees to fast-track the legislation. Is the strong presidency that was promised by Macron on the campaign trail too strong? Will the blowback at home dent the new leader's continental ambitions? Macron hosting a migration summit this Monday after a tour of Central and Eastern Europe where he made a heavy pitch for anti-social dumping reforms. Today in the France 24 debate, we're asking if the honeymoon is over for France's president. And with us, a supporter of Emmanuel Macron on the campaign trail, Lex Paulson, who teaches rhetoric and human rights at the French Political Science Institute, Sciences Po. How are you, sir?
Very good. Nice to be back.
When's it back to school for you?
A week from Friday, my new rhetoric students come to class.
Okay. Also joining us is conservative political consultant Bruno Bernard, who hails from the Les Républicains party. How are you?
Fine. Thank you.
All right. Nice to see you. Nice to see you as well. Alexis Poulain, journalist, co-founder of Le Monde Moderne, who's written in the French edition of the Huffington Post on Macron's missteps. I'll ask you about that in a short while. The France 24 debate on Facebook and on Twitter. The hashtag F24debate. With no strong opposition at this time, it's of course too early to say if Emmanuel Macron is circling the wagons, but he is entering what you could say a crucial phase. Emerald Maxwell has more.
It's been a disappointing summer for Emmanuel Macron. After suffering the worst popularity drop in 20 years for a French president in July, his approval rating has slumped a further 14 points to hit 40%, just over 3 months into the job. His government now faces a test in autumn. It needs to pass some key policies, chief among them, labour law reform. On Thursday, the Prime Minister will present the government's plans, which are expected to make it easier for employers to hire and fire, and give them more power to negotiate conditions of workers at company level, bypassing industry-wide agreements. The reforms are to be enacted by a form of decree by the end of the month. But the government is still facing significant opposition from the street. The CGT trade union has called for a day of action and strikes on 12th of September. And on the 23rd, Jean-Luc Mélenchon's left-wing Unsubmissive France party will lead a demonstration in Paris. Pushing through proposed changes to unemployment benefits and the pension system will be a challenge too. And with cuts planned across multiple sectors, the 2018 budget is also likely to be a bitter pill to swallow.
Alexis Poulain, the new French president promised on the campaign trail he would go through with this reform. He's doing what he said. Why is he dropping in the polls?
I think he's dropping in the poll because of a series of different rifts and rows they've been with the army on the 14th of July. Then you see that there's a bit of mismatch in communication. He said he will do that, is according to the plan, but he was elected also partially because the French didn't want Marine Le Pen to win the presidential election. So is according to what happened during the summer, and there's been a lot of question about public spending, about the maquillage and things like that. That might look silly, but all in all, it looks very...
There was a newspaper article about him having 26,000 euros in makeup expenses.
Yeah, which is a lot, but French politicians do love their makeup. And the question is he prepared? The majority also of a new member of parliament elected seems very unprepared. They're all new to the job, and there was a lot of question mark about what are they in for? Will the reform be pushed? And also the Minister for Work, Muriel Pénicaud, was on board in a row about winning some money over getting rid of people when she was working for a French giant.
You're saying the French voted for him because he wasn't Marine Le Pen?
Because they didn't want Marine Le Pen to win, and he was... I mean, you have no option. If you love the Republic, you have to vote for Emmanuel Macron.
Does this mean he has to change tack in how he governs in his policies, or does he go through with what he promised on the campaign?
He will have to go through what he's promised, but he will have to be very careful about the social agenda and to listen. And I think he's able to do that. And it's a big difference between what happened before and what is happening now. You can see that he announced something, there is something happening, and then he can actually say, well, look, I didn't say that. Say about the APL. I don't know if we can go into that, but he said it was a silly thing to say after actually the government was going ahead. So he will be listening closely to the social anger, I think, and he's clever. And it will be more difficult for him in France than in Europe to push the agenda of reforms.
Lex Paulsen?
Look, I mean, we're entering into a period of intense criticism, and I say to my French friends, I don't want to compete in the French national sport, but I will offer one interpretation, which is to say that people who think that he only won because of the existence of a far-right candidate forget that we built a movement of 300,000 people, the largest political movement in France in a year. And this was a movement about ideas and about pragmatic changes that were going to take the best of left and right. One of those, in fact, the hardest of those is changing France's famously inflexible labor code. This is just one of a package of structural economic reforms, including unemployment, including retirement, and including job training that we're going to be seeing over the next several months. And the fact is that no one criticizes a politician for not keeping their promises, and Macron is keeping his most important promise despite some rough headwinds.
So how do you explain his drop in popularity?
Look, I think some of it is, frankly, after months and months and months of a very intense political season. The French public is rather exhausted and doesn't want to have to think about politics every day. Some of these issues, including the issue with the army, were not handled extremely well by the government's communications. But frankly, it wasn't a summer with a lot of news, and there's a natural reversion to a kind of a general cynicism about what government can do. And it's in the face of that cynicism where reform really needs leadership to be pushed. And it will be coming from not only the president, but from the 314 députés En Marche, who, yes, you say they're not prepared, but this is the strength of the movement, was that these were not professional politicians. They come in with their own ideas. They added dozens of amendments to the moralization law and the security law, and they will play a very important part of this next phase.
All right, on his tour of Eastern Europe last week, President Macron was asked in Bucharest by Romania's French community about the chances of his labor reform bill.
La France n'est pas un pays réformable.
France is an unreformable country. Lots of people have tried, and they haven't succeeded because the French hate reform. We take any opportunity to avoid it. They're people that hate all that.
C'est un peuple qui déteste cela.
What were your thoughts, Bruno Bernard, when he said that last week, that the French hate reform, but it's up to the government to explain it and get it through? Is he right? Is he correct?
He reminded me of Jacques Chirac when he called the French a very conservative people. I don't think it's always a very good idea for a president, especially a French president, to criticize his compatriots, especially abroad, telling them that they just can't handle reforms. I mean, France, whether you like it or not, has been reformed for the past 30 years. I mean, a lot of things have changed in this country, so reforms are doable, but you have to explain them and you have to make them fair. And unfortunately for Emmanuel Macron, the reform he proposed during his first months in power didn't seem fair, especially this idea of taxing the pensioners, of taking away €5 from benefits on housing. All this, made it feel like he was after the little guys, which was, I think, a proper mistake. And I think he has to go back to the roots of what you said about the movement that he built during the campaign. But I think it's a great thing for him that he's been brought back to earth. I mean, those headlines about being Jupiter and everything, awful, dreadful. I mean, the pressure on him and the pressure on his office was unbearable. And it's a good thing for him that now, it's a reality check, and now we'll see what sort of actual politician he will be.
I very much agree with what Bruno just said. In fact, governing is hard, but guess what? It's supposed to be hard. When I worked on Capitol Hill during Barack Obama's first few months, of course people were nervous about the poll ratings going down, and but when you do hard things, it forces you to take risks, and then you have to go and explain it to the public.
All right, let's bring in another precinct here. Sophie Rouser, spokesperson on European affairs for the France Insoumise, unbowed party of the hard left of Jean-Luc Mélenchon. Thank you for being with us here in the France 24 debate. Sophie, let me ask you.
Good evening.
Let me ask you, a poll came out this weekend from the Institute Odoxa. Let me read it to you. It says 56% of the French favor his labor reform bill, but 63% feel he won't succeed, and 61% oppose caps on severance pay, and 63% oppose him doing this by decree, by ordinances. Your thoughts? The French want reform but don't? What do they want?
Yes, the French do want reform, and to link it to the previous debate with your speakers, I mean, it's a very old mantra, really, to say that French people don't want reforms and so on. I mean, just on the labor law, there has been in the past 30 years 160 reforms. So people are ready for reforms, not any kind of reforms and not at any price. This is the point. Yes, we do need massive reforms, but the problem of our labor law is not that it's a very detailed or too dense, or is that we need to be in the modern world, and the new challenges that we have upon us are not making less equality and protection for workers, but it's about adapting to new technologies, for example. So think about teleworking or local jobs, how you preserve this incredible, not only French, but European know-how. So how you can defend a European patent of quality and so on. And what he's doing is basically what Valéry Giscard d'Estaing or Sarkozy could have been doing. So, I mean, the reality check is done. It's already done. What we've seen, even apart from the labor reform, what we already seen, with this abolition of assisted job, the decrease of the subsidies for students, the APL cuts, the further exemption on the wealth tax. Well, we're seeing that this government is a government for the well-off, for the very few, and not for the many.
Thanks, Paulson.
There was a lot in what Sophie said that I think is very reasonable. Unfortunately, La France Insoumise this summer has shown that they're in the denunciation business as opposed to the policy-making business. The members of La France Insoumise who took to the hémicycle in July,
to
the parliament condemned the labor unions who were taking part in the dialogue social. Why did they do that? Did they think that the syndicats don't have a right and an interest to discuss the details of these reforms with the government? The government, I mean, maybe, I don't know if Valéry Giscard d'Estaing did 100+ meetings with syndicats from the labor community and from the from the employment community during his reforms, but I know that Macron and Michele have bent over backwards to bring in voices into the process, and yet La France Insoumise says that they shouldn't.
Alexis Poulain, has the government gone too slowly or too fast? The previous government of François Hollande pushed a labor reform bill in the last year of his mandate, and that was too late, said observers at the time.
Very too late.
Is he going too fast, though, Emmanuel Macron, with this bill?
He has to go fast, and that was the deal, saying that he will have the ordonnance and he will go faster because these reforms need to go fast so that the other reform will get in line, and in 5 years there'll be some results. So that's why he's going so fast. And you're right, there's been a lot of consultation with the unions, and that's new. And there's hundreds of meetings, and Muriel Pénicaud has been listening, and that's what's new about it. So the
unions have complained, though, that what they've been shown is piecemeal.
Of course, they
haven't been shown the whole project.
They don't have
and they're asking why not.
Because they won't win in the end. Clearly, the reform is to make the French employment market compatible with the EU, which was not the case. So we have to streamline so we have a more stronger voice in the EU. The German, all the economic partners will look at France and say, okay, right, you're on the same boat, so we can work together. And it's not something that the French are ready to hear. And when you say French is unreformable, it's true. It can be true. Because reforms seems, in French vocabulary, when you hear reform, you are going backwards, or you are actually breaking the social winds of the past 100 years. So you have to change the mentality. And Macron, I think, where he's good, is that he knows that we have to transform to adapt the 21st century, to go into the digital economy, to change this. But this is a transformation. And he said it when he was saying that France is unreformable, because now is the time to transform. And that takes time. It won't take 5 years. It would take 10, maybe 15 years. And the streets will talk in September with the syndicate, with the France Unbowed. We'll see how far it will go. But it will not win in the end. We have to adapt, that's for sure. It's how we adapt. And you have to take care of the poorest, of the people who are unemployed at present, who have trouble getting employed, the young people. In France, we have a big problem with structural young being unemployed. That is the main issue that the government has to tackle.
Sophie Rauser?
Yes, about, this is not, it's not because you're having a discussion that you may call it a social dialogue. The trade unions, of course, are doing their job, and it's very important that they have this discussion with the government. But if you have a discussion and at the end, the governments, just throw away the proposals of the trade union, this is not what you call a social dialogue. This is what you call a social coup, which is very different. Now, on the European topic, because of course this is a very European topic, well, what this reform is about really is doing what Schröder did in Germany decades ago. And what we have seen is not, improvement of the condition for workers. It's quite the contrary. We have 13 million poor people, poor workers in Germany. Is this the system we want for the French people?
We're going to pick up on that point, Sophie Rauser, when we come back. We have to take a very quick break. Sorry to interrupt. We have to take a very quick break. We'll be right back. You're watching the France 24 debate.